Last week I told you our message was a two-parter. Well, last time I was before you, I told you about our message was a two-parter. And it was as such. So we ended that last study with the word to be continued. And I want to pick up on that thought as we step into Galatians, the 3rd chapter. And this is the 12th lesson coming out of this study. Wow. So as I was thinking about that, I was trying to say, how would I start this? How would I start this? And then I remembered how the series starts. So sometimes it's very popular today as when you start into a series and the next week it comes in and it starts off like this. Previously, we were in our last study of Galatians. And then they'll go into a little series of catching back up. So I want to start with that. Previously, during our last study of Galatians, we found ourselves trying to define and understand two key truths. To Paul's understanding as he went to speak not only in Galatians, but throughout all of his letters. I'm talking about Romans and Ephesians and Corinthians and all. There's a key truth that lays at the foundation of his thinking. Because he uses this terminology, and this terminology has somewhat got really misskewed in our reasoning and thoughts. So I wanted to bring a definition to what he was saying in this thought. The first truth that we was trying to come to terms with, or came to understand last week, our last day, was the works of the law. As we were talking about the works of the law, we're saying, like, what is this? Because Paul would always talk about, these people going back and trying to find their confidence in the works of the law. And I know how we interpret that, again, as we speak in terms, as we walk in the things that we do within our understanding of God's word, as to try not to be legalistic in that aspect, because just when we hear that term, our minds goes right toward this legalistic aspect of it. But what we come to understand is that terminology that Paul used was really very narrowly defined. He was trying to, he coined a term called the works of the law, which specifically talked about the God-ordained signs of distinction as the faith. When he speaks in terms, he's saying that there are some God-ordained signs of his brethren or Jewish identity that God had ordained them as a nation, as a people, to adhere to. And some of the things we see, because we'll always hear people talk about these are Jewish things, whether it be the Shabbat, or whether it be keeping the festivals, whether it be doing the fringes or circumcision. All these things are quickly associated with their nation. And in the scriptures, as we go through Leviticus and throughout the whole Tanakh, you can see where God had defined and told them what to do and how to do it. So Paul took that same terminology of what God had defined for them as their ceremonial and physical identity, and he coined a term in order for them to grasp, and he used the term works of the law. Now, they understood exactly what that is. So when he said it, they knew exactly what he was talking about. We don't know it as well. So we talked about that during our last study to understand that, to get a working knowledge on that, so when we hear that, we could bring it into perspective as to what he was asking or what he was saying. The second thing we said that was really key, specifically as he's talking to the Galatians and stuff, we said we wanted to define what was his anger, what was his premise, what was he so upset with these influencers about, what were they doing? And we come to understand on that particular facet as well, is that the thing that he's so irate about was that they were literally being involved in forced proselytization. They were proselytizing these God-fearers, these people that came in and trying to coerce them to go the full gambit when it wasn't so much necessary. Those two things we find in Paul's letters a lot, and he uses the terminology interchangeably. When he starts talking about circumcision, uncircumcised, circumcision, he's just talking about this equation of the God-bearers and them coming under full conversion as such. That was the basis of our last study we went through. I was just trying to understand what Paul is saying. And I use that as a basis, as a principle, to set the foundation for what, instead of a foundational stone for our teaching today. So, with that in place, The title of today's study is entitled, The Blessings of Abraham. The Blessings of Abraham. And I wanted to understand what, I wanted to get a better grasp of what Paul was saying and how this whole thing unfolded within him. One of the very first things we need to understand as I step into this study, I need you to take your text and come with me and let's see what that blessing entailed as we look at Genesis 12, 1 through 3. Take me over to Genesis 12. And again, very familiar passage of scripture and foundational for our Jewish brethren, and it's for foundational that we'll find for us as well. I mean, it's key as we move forward to this piece. Anyway, when it comes into Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3, reads like this. And I'm reading from a complete Jewish Bible, so it just says, Now Adonai said to Abraham, Get yourself out of your country and away from your kinsmen and away from your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I'll make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you are to be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, but I will curse anyone who curses you. And by you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. He's going to do something awesome to all the earth through this man. This text that I just read was at the foundation of all Paul's reasoning as he's talking to his God-fearers, as he's talking to the people. There's something in the foundation that he set his premise on and was able to speak from. This piece, again, was at the foundation of his thinking. He's speaking to a people, these God-fearers, who are foreign to the richness of the Abrahamic blessing. I mean, they understood it, but not to the fullness of all that was stated, that God was trying to speak inside of this. But it's also a tool of divisive strategy for the influencers. Because as the influencers, or these people that came in to put pressure as such, it was this piece that these God-fearers and other ones were not able to attain unless they went the full gambit. So as he understood on one side, understanding the blessings of Abraham and how that correlated with the whole understanding of their faith, instead of being such a richness, here what Paul was really upset with the influencers was that it became a divisive strategy that was foundation to their thinking. And as Paul looked at on this, specifically as we get into our study today, as Paul looked back on this, he wanted to bring a more deeper and a definitive or accurate understanding of what was included when they came to faith within them. He wanted to stop this strategy. See, and this thing still hits us today. But he wanted to stop the strategy of what was taking place, and he wanted them to understand the deeper, more accurate understanding of what was gained in their inclusion within the plan of God. Keep your finger on Genesis 12:1 because we'll come back here. But let's go back over to our text scripture, which is over in Galatians chapter 3. Looking at verses 6 through 10, which has been our text scripture as we move forward in the study. Now see, even though, the interesting thing, even though we hear a lot about Abraham's blessings and all that's entailed therein, but we truly don't fully understand it to the depth as Paul is trying to communicate it. You know, I hear the song, Father Abraham has many sons, as Father Abraham, and I am one of them, and so are you. So let's just... See? We understand that piece, but when you go into society, I know about this Abrahamic blessing, what God said to him when he told him, get to out of your country, and I will bless you, and I'm going to do something. So I got this premise, this framework to work with. But if somebody set me down and says, so what does all that mean? What is God telling you that? And as a goyim, as a Messianic believer, as you come inside there, how does that relate to you? What's the fullness of it? What's God exposing you to? What's he selling you? What is the thing that was causing the patriarchs, to covet the blessing? Many blessings. Yaakov, Isaac, Jacob, Isaac, the sons, the families, they understood something stronger. And see, the influencers, those ones that were putting the pressure on them, that was coming at them to share with them, they understood, they had a much better grasp of it and expectations thereof than we did. They knew more about what was all entailed in that blessing than we can probably get our hands on. They thought they knew it all and what it all entailed. So it's a way that you can get very prideful about something, but you may not understand all of it. They don't know the rest of the story. You have just enough to be dangerous. But something happened in the midst of the birth of Paul. Something happened when Yeshua stepped on the earth. There was something that transpired when Yeshua came in to bring all the things to fulfillment that they were totally unaware of. Something that they heard back in the Tanakh among the prophets. Because the prophets of them were telling them about something that was going to transpire. They called it, as God was going to move within our dispensation. And how he was going to redeem a world. All that they understood, that they knew, the various different priests or the scholars or the people who tried to articulate what that means. But they understood that there was a mystery out there. But not understanding the fullness of what that mystery was. But God, who knows all things. See, there was a reason and a purpose that he called Paul. And he didn't call Paul, he called Paul for the specificity of unveiling what he called this mystery. See, Paul was sitting in the same seat along with the influencers. He's more hardcore. Jew a Jew. Pharisee a Pharisee. According to the law, perfect. He understood. But who would know that God would reach down and grab someone just like him, who desired to sit on the Sanhedrin and to be a Pharisaic leader, one that can espouse, he wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. See, when he was born, it could seem like this, of all the persuasions, that he was born in this family that lived in the city of Tarsus. When Paul go back and start talking about his pedigree, he said, I sat at the feet of Gamaliel, the one that was a leader and setting the tone for all Judaism. I schooled at his feet. So he understood. He was wise. He wasn't tucked in Perry, Iowa. Some little small town. God put him into a metropolis, like LA. That's why he could try and says, I can speak to all men. Bond, free, rich, power, religiously, secularly. He was well raised. And all that can seem somewhat happy chance until you see the providential hand of God on his life. And then Paul could see everything that he thought that if he was born with a religious or a pharisaical silver spoon in his mouth, if he was set in the hierarchy to make those decisions, it wasn't by happy chance. Because when God met him on the road to Damascus, in his mind, with all the things he's seen, he had purposed to do his will. Not God's, his will. Well able to do so. Very affluent. He said he had letters from the high priest. He knew them. But somehow, when God arrested his thought, put him on the ground, spoke to him, he said all the populace were aware of what his initiative and what his goals and plans were. When God spoke to Ananias and sent him to Paul, he said, whoa, we all know this man. This man is a moth sneezer. He's hurling people in jail, disrupting families. He's persecuting the people who are even thinking about Yeshua. And in the midst of this, God didn't try and say, well, I think I can save him. I think I can work on him. I think I might be able to make something out of him. God says, he has been a chosen vessel to me. I had molded him from the beginning. And I'm going to send him to the Gentiles as a spokesman. He thinks it's for him, but when I arrested him to change his mind, to arrest him. And then Paul says that, in his words, he says, he fell on the ground, he couldn't see no man. Shut up with him and God. 3 days. And even when his eyes were opened again, he says he couldn't hardly speak to no one. He says that he found himself off, he went off into the desert for a while. Where God was doing a thought within him to rearrange his whole thinking process. All the things and the religiosity that he had in him, God was going to put it all in the right perspective. And I believe during this particular time, with all that he was doing, God unveiled the mystery. Because it's going to be at the foundation of everything he was going to do. He had to be able to articulate this to his brethren. He'd be able to articulate this to a people that didn't even understand the faith. God had in him all the writings and the books of the Brit Hadashah, or the New Testament, as we know, were all pinned up inside of him. And God knew that he was going to be able to articulate and write it out, where even Peter and all the disciples, they look at him and they stand amazed at the workings that he had, or the knowledge that he had of all this truth. So, I believe that wisdom that was unfolded before them was going to be articulated to him. So, we speak sometimes and said, if the enemy had known, he probably wouldn't have done this. Or sometimes if you get the sneak peek, you might change your mind. I believe the influencers, one of the things they're using as part of what they're doing was using their alignment and their covenant alignment under Abraham. And they could bring it up to these ones, these God-fearers. They may not fully have all the working understanding and knowledge what Paul was talking about or his brethren was talking about, but they wanted to have something else. They felt like they needed to go this extra mile in order for it to all fall into place. So, I feel what transpires that when we get to Galatians 3, verse 6, when we pick up the study, it says this. And it was the same Abraham that trusted in God and was faithful to him, that was credited to his account. Be assured then that it is those who live by faith, by trusting, who are really the children of Abraham. For the Tanakh foreseen that God would consider the Gentiles righteous when they live by faith, trusting. He told the news to Abraham in advance by saying, in connection with you, all the nations will be blessed. And so then, by saying, in connection with you, so then those who rely on faith are blessed along with Abraham, who himself trusted and believed. So I'm saying, why did he bring that up in the middle of Galatians? I just know that that's what the thing that they were saying in order to fully be one and within the community. You have to undergo this. You have to do this. But Paul, I believe, understood the fullness of what God's plans was. See, because when they would come to them, some of them, these influencers, claimed Abraham as exclusively their father, and not the father of the Gentiles. This is a Jewish thing, as they would say. And some of them thought of Abraham as having given them merit, a right, and benefits into the kingdom or into salvation or to them and their descendants, all because of the birth of who they were. But see, that's how come John, Yochanan Hamathel, John the Baptist, got upset with them. Over in Matthew, remember 3:9, when they come down to seek his baptism in the water, what did he tell them? Who called you vipers, you brood of vipers? Don't think just because of your heritage that you have been given carte blanche to walk through. He said, God can make these stones sons of Abraham. You're saying, wow, what's that about? But he's letting them know it's not like that. He rebuked the witness, the reasoning, and so did Paul through his letters. But again, they came at it with one way, and then God is the kind of God that flips a page, turns the thing this way. If I had to try to ad-lib, I'd probably say something like this. Well, since you brought him up, let's talk about that a little bit. That's part of the that's the essence of what he's saying. When he says, when he comes back in 6, in the first verses from 1 to 6, he first looked at them and says, what has happened to you? I don't understand. Something's transpired. The other scripture says, who bewitched you or somebody? Why are you so foolish? What happened? You were walking so well. What happened? What did they tell you? What undermined everything that you was talking about? You believed and you were walking so well. Yeshua is among them. You understood that. Miracles are happening. You're finding their gifts. You're awakening your faith. But then something happened to the point that now you think you got to add something to what you just did in order to get more. That's what he talked about. So let's talk about Abraham, since that's where they're coming from. When in reality, what they come to understand, Abraham is our prototype. He's the greatest example that we have of one who believed and came into the faith. When speaking of Abraham, the influencers didn't perceive the mystery that was contained in his blessing, which God had already revealed to Paul. I believe that the mystery was God's plan to reunite. You guys are going to say, show me that in the text. So I need to step over here. It's 5:13. I have the ability to speak my heart, my mind here. I'm saying, what was God doing? Over in 5:13. What was God trying to do when he called Abraham? I think what transpired was, what the mystery was that in him, God was going to restore the scatteredness of the broken people that happened at the Tower of Babel. Now think. Over in Genesis 11, what is it? Over in Genesis 11, chapters 1 through 9, verses 1 through 9, it speaks in terms of how the whole earth was of one accord. It's all functioning as one. Till something happened. God says he's seen them get exalted. He's seen them where they try to place themselves above his name. He's seen them, he says, if he didn't disrupt it, he says there'll be nothing outside they can do. And so he said he scattered them, confounded the language and scattered them to all parts. And the question will come in and says, how will God get them back? What will restore them back? Unless there's a master plan. Unless there's a master plan. And I think that master plan fell right smack dab in the middle of Abraham's blessing, when God blessed Abraham and he gave him a glimpse of the future, and he gave him a glimpse of what he was speaking about, of the fullness of his call. For I think what God did in the midst of that, when he told him in Genesis 12:3, and he told him, says, and by you all the families of the earth are going to be blessed. I believe that's in that restoration. So in doing so, I believe that there's a plan to bring all nations back together as one. I think there's a plan of restoration to restore. We've seen a sneak preview of it when it showed what happened at Shavuot. When the Holy Spirit came down, he says, and he took the people from all the earth, from all different languages. He said, but when the Spirit came down, he united the languages again. And everyone was able to hear them in their own voice. There was no more fragmentation. Just for that moment, he said, as they speak, he said, we're all hearing them now again. At one particular point where we all had one voice, now the voices were scattered, but now the voices come back together, and we can hear each of them in our tongue, giving praise to the glory and honor of God. Worshiping God. It says, and it stunned them. It says, how can this be? And it said, when that glory happened, there became a unity of thoughts. Oh, Matt, you're going to have to really pull this together here. Where are we going with this? I think God gave him the hint for the first time of the good news that he was going to restore the world, all the nations, and bring them back as one. I think this is what God did. Paul looks at this passage. When we look at the call of Abraham, he don't look at this as not only as a call that was the beginning of the Jewish nation as a whole, when he called Abraham out. But I believe he looks at it as a creation of the body of believers as well. He's doing a great work in the midst of this, in which Jew and Gentile are becoming one. That's when he speaks in terms of the one man. One man. So in essence, what Paul is telling them, now I'm giving you my words as I'm just talking. I hope you get your fingers loosened up, because I have to go take you to scriptures and back up on all what I'm saying. Because what he says is, so in essence, when he said in the scriptures, he looks at them and what they were saying. Paul brought this whole thing up, is that believers as a whole is letting them know you're trying to patch something into place, but you're already blessed. You've already been tied in to this, along with Abraham. You're already his kids. You're already his seed, descendants of the faith. Why? He told them up earlier, you heard the word when I brought you Yeshua and the faith. He said, and your faith quickened. You heard God's word, and something transpired in your mind, and you reached and grabbed it, and you believed. He says, in doing that, you did just as much as Abraham did. That's all he did. Heard God's voice and believed. And God counted it to him as righteousness. They heard his voice and they believed. He says, but then someone else came to you with another gospel, another word, another good expression, trying to get you to add to what you had and to undo that and let you know you have to work it. I'm about to take you to the word because you guys are getting too quiet on me. I want you to take a look and see what he says. He says, there's no need to add anything. You are sealed, just like your father, Abraham. So in it, he turns and says, look at them from the beginning. Now take your finger, let's go back to Genesis 12, 1 and 2. He said, God says in the scripture, Now the Lord said to Abraham, get yourself out of your country. I need you to get up and get away from them. Move. Why? He says, and away from your kinsmen and away from your father's house. In other words, he's saying, I need you to get up and get out and get away from Nahor, your father. He says, why? He says, which has become, he and your father's house and all that's with them have become very idolatrous. I'm saying this as commentary. And the whole society, all that's with them, has become dangerous and destructive. What do you mean, dangerous and destructive? Let me back that up. See, he says it was as God got him and brought him out. I can see it, everything become a shambles with Abraham and that family. God looked at him and he reached in like a brand, like snatching the brand out of fire. He says, from you, I will make a great nation and I'm going to bless the whole world through you. And mercifully, God snatched him as a brand from a fire. See, that's what Joshua, he says, look at Joshua 24:2. I said, Nahor and his family all became idolatrous. Horrible. When God snatched him. But you remember God said, what Joshua says over in 24:2, as he talked about Nahor and the family. In Joshua 24:2, it says, Joshua said to all the people, this is what Adonai, the God of Israel, says. And in old times, in antiquity, your ancestors lived on the other side of the Euphrates River, Tetrach, the father of Abraham and Nahor. And they served other gods, became idolaters. He says, and I took Abraham from beyond the river to lead him to this land. He said, but what he's telling, he says, Joshua looks when he's speaking to the people, he's letting them know that Abraham wasn't holy. I mean, their family wasn't. He says they were serving other gods. And God's going to make another nation out of Abraham. But he gives him proof of such. When he speaks, as he looks at them and he says, as Joshua speaks to them, he's letting them know that the ancestors come from a broken root. And God told them, he says, in Genesis 1:2, he says, and he had him go to a land that I will show you, and I'll make of you a great nation. He says, and I will bless you, and I'll make your name great, and you are to be great. What's he speaking in terms of all the things when he says, I will bless you? I believe God speaks to him and lets him know this. In his voice, he says, I will bless you. I will bless you with every spiritual gift that's within me. I will bless you both not only spiritual, but temporal as well as eternal. The things I'm giving to you are eternal and lasting. These aren't temporal things. And you will be a blessing. In other words, he says, you will be both a pattern and an instrument of blessedness for others. I'm setting you up because by you, everything will be governed as to how they're blessed, and the goodness of the blessings. And he speaks in terms of his children. He says, I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you are to be a blessing. He speaks of his descendants and all that's contained therein. He says, from your manservants to your fellow servants, you should be blessed, and they'll be instruments of righteousness through you. In other words, and then God does another caveat when he says this, and I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse anyone who curses you. I'm going to paraphrase that word. He says, in other words, those that are your friends and your enemies, they'll be the same to me. Who's ever your friend will be my friend. I'll bless those that bless you. And those that curse you, that's your enemy, they're my enemy as well. And again he says, then God reinforces, I believe, the spirit of restoration, where God is calling all nations, all people back together. I think as he enlightened Paul's mind, I think he stretched it beyond the boundaries of his world as they knew it, and showed them how big and how broad the boundaries are, and what Abraham's blessing was all entailed in doing. For within it, he says, again, by you, Abraham, all the families on the earth will be blessed. And then Paul took all that information and then wrapped it up. Let me show you how he defines it. Go with me to Galatians 3, 8 and 9. Getting them to understand 3, 8 and 9 says, that's why it comes back with an intro and says, also the scriptures foreseeing that God would consider the Gentiles righteous when they live by faith, just as Abraham did. He said, God's calling you righteous. He said, because just like Abraham did, you're living by faith and you trusted in God. God told the good news to Abraham in advance. Where? How did God tell him in advance? What was God telling him? He says, when he came out and says, so then, by you, in connection with you, all the nations will be blessed. So then those who rely or trust being faithful are blessed right along with Abraham, who is just as faithful and blessed with them. And then he dropped down to verse 16, and he brought that into it and says, and now the promises were made to Abraham and to his seed, the descendants. It doesn't say, and to seeds, as if to many. On the contrary, it speaks of one, and to your seed. And this seed is coming through the Messiah. Let's take it one more. He takes it down to verse 28 and 29. For in union with the Messiah, he's talking about the children, about the God-fearers. For union with the Messiah, you are all children of God through your faith. Because as many of you who were immersed in the Messiah, or have clothed yourself with the Messiah, in whom, I love this, he says, whom, as you come in, there's neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free man, neither male nor female. For in Christ you are all one. And if you belong to the Messiah, you are a seed of Abraham and heirs to the promise. In other words, in all that he called him, Paul saying, I thought this was awesome, he says, as all he's called him, he says, he asked that question before. He said, how did Abraham receive the blessing? He said, was he circumcised or uncircumcised? Was he a Jew or Goyim? You can answer me. Yeah. He said everything came to him, he said, when there wasn't no Jews. Everything came to him before it all started. With all the promises, when God spoke to him, Abraham was just like you. The same. Blessings and the depth of what he's calling him was just like you. And he says, let's look at one more. Then Paul jumps out of Galatians. Take a look at Romans 4:16. And 4:16 says this, Romans 4:16. He says the reason the promise is based on faith is so that it may come as God's free gift, a promise that can be relied on by the seed, not only for those who live within the framework of the Torah, but also those with a great kind of trust or faith, just as Abraham had. Just the same kind. So, as he's making this case, I went back and I was thinking, I says, so Father, I mean, if that would be the case, what transpired? What transpired in regard to that terminology that Paul said? No, he talked about works of the law. Specifically, the God-ordained signs of distinction as God set them aside and defined it. And when we looked at them, we talked about them. What were those signs that we talked about? One, he said he gave them dietary laws. We talk about speaking kosher, things of that nature. He talks about giving them the Shabbat. He talks about giving them the festivals, or his God times and the covenants with them. And I said, God, I find we as a people, that's exactly what we do. What do we do then? God, if you brought us all in together as one, God, if Abraham's blessing was speaking in terms of the mystery of the inclusion of the world, the believers, those believers outside those God-fears, they're all coming in as part of this covenant agreement. It's the restoration of the brokenness that transpired. I think something else happened at the fall. I mean, at the Tower of Babel. I think it's more than just trying to build the tower. I think it's more than just trying to reach the pinnacle. I think there was a full separation of God's ways. I think when they did such, it was not so much trying to do a tower, their hearts had changed, and I think a lot of God's ways were abandoned as well. For example, God says, each of the things we're talking about, whether it be for the dietary things, these transpired before the fall. Because God was able to talk to them about what was clean and what was unclean. Tell them what to eat and what not to eat. Tell them not to drink blood. He's giving them dietary elements to preserve them and to sustain them. Before the Torah even came, one thing that God had that was paramount of all of his times, he told them what? To keep the Sabbath. Because there was a day that God rested. It's his time. Before the fall, before Moshe, before Abraham, before Noah, these things were already in place that God had defined for all mankind to participate, to be part of. I think it even got to the point where we speak in terms of his appointed times. I shared this in Covenant Living. When I spoke in terms of saying, do you believe that Pesach, Shavuot, First Fruits, Rosh Hashanah, all those things were in place and existed before creation? Oh, I'm thankful that you did that, Tawana. Tawana looked at me in her eyes like this, like she was trying to think about it. Scripture says Yeshua was slain when? Before the foundation of the world. It says before Garden of Eden, before things have all come in place, before he sprung the stars in place, Yeshua was already slain. And God in his plan already knew, and he said the Lamb was slain. That's what it says in Revelations, before the foundation of the world. So if that was done before, then evidently the means and the methodology to redeem man back, to get man back from the fall. God's not making this thing up on the fly. It's something that's set in place, and his plan is just unfolding before us. So if Yeshua was slain, then evidently there had to be a Passover to be part, which is why he was going to redeem. If he's already been slain, how is he going to be slain? Evidently the cross and the crucifixion had already been already being. If he's already been slain, then evidently he wasn't made to lay there forever. So his resurrection had already been part of the equation. If he was slain at the beginning, God had already called him and said, he's the first fruit of many to come, as a shadow. If he's been slain at the beginning, then it turns around and says, he knew that when Adam fell, when he bit and Adam fell, the glory left Adam. And Adam said, Father, he knew he left it. How was God going to get that glory back inside a man? If he's slain in the beginning, then Shabbat, that talks about the infilling of the holy presence again, was already in place. If he's been slain at the beginning, how are we going to get back into Garden of Eden? How are we going to get back? Unless there is a resurrection and healing of all mankind. The sound we talked about in the Revelation, talk about the Feast of Trumpets, or we talk about the Shofar, or the blazing, bringing restoration. If he's been slain, how do we get rid of all the sinfulness? How do we keep our bodies from being full of sin? He's talked about being unleavened. If he puts together a season which we call Yom Kippur, a thing of redemption. If he was slain, and the final chapter speaks in terms of Revelation, it's saying that we're going to go to the marriage supper of the Lamb. Sukkot, which is the feast. In fact, it's so funny, of all the feasts, he didn't say, when Yeshua comes back on this in Jeremiah, it doesn't say he's going to call everyone back to Pesach, or everyone back to Tabernacle. Sukkot. He says they will all come back during the whole world's going to come back, and they're going to celebrate what? The Feast of Tabernacles, which is Sukkot. So, and he tells them when Yeshua comes back, and he's reigning for 1,000 years on earth, the millennial kingdom. When he comes back, he's going to reign. He says, and the beast and the false prophet is going to be put away from earth. He says all the other nations are going to be governed if they don't come back up to Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. So in other words, he's saying, whether you celebrate now or later, you're going to come back and you're going to celebrate his times. So if that be the case, if the Lamb was slain, all the other steps had to be in place in order for him to walk it out. Because Yeshua says, I didn't come to get rid of nothing. I come to fulfill. So all the things are set in place. But now when he comes, everything starts coming into the fullness of time, which is why Yeshua can turn around and says, for desire, I'm long for this. Because everything is clicking along just as my Father has stated. And that's how come he can say this so very well, God himself. When he looks at them, and we turn around and says, what about all those Jewish festivals? God says, there ain't Jewish festivals. There was no Jew. These are mine. These are my times. And these are my elements I put into place. It was never intended for man to sit there eating animals and drinking blood. But since you are, after the flood, you need the nourishment. He says, I'm going to make it so that you eat the right thing. So he made clean and unclean. Don't eat the pig. That's my janitor. Don't eat the this fish in the earth, in the water, he said, because it eats, it's a bottom feeder. It eats junk. I want my people to be healthy and whole. These are the things you should eat and how you should eat. So there must have been a dietary thought that's been set in place before Sinai. After the fall, how did Cain and Abel, Noah, how did they understand the sacrificial system? How did they know what to bring God and how to bring it? Who told them that? Moses wasn't even born yet. These are all happening before the book came into being. Something was set in place within the whole atmosphere that they were all aware of. And God honored Abel's offering. He says, because it's right. He didn't try and say you did wrong. He honored it. He told Cain, if you do right. Who told them how to build the altar? Who told them what to bring? Who told them how to approach God? Who guided them? Moses ain't here yet. Nothing's been written. Who's guiding them? There's things that have been set in place since then. When Adam was walking in Garden Eden, because as we understand now, it says he was walking in the cool garden on the day when God come and talk with him. What day would that have been? I just throw it up. Well, could it happen to be a day that God's resting? He said, I could walk in and just fellowship with you. If in God's times, he turns around and lets them know before he puts Passover in place, before he puts any of his times in place, the only thing he started when he spoke to them, he says, thou shalt keep what? The Sabbath. I'm going to restore where you fell from. So if all these things are in place before the fall, he sets a people who are supposed to guide us and lead us so that we can see what he's like. And he takes these elements and stick it on them so they can walk before the world and they can be a light to a darkened world. And then God would look at them and chastise them if they tried to pollute it or distort it before the people. Things are in place. God gives them his covenant, his ways. So, if at the Tower of Babel, where the world got polluted, this is where God came down and confounded, scattered. I think, what I'm saying, I think it's not so much just focusing on building a tower. I think it's focused on seeing what was in the heart. And I think the heart rejected all the pieces, not only of his times, of his ways, of his covenant, of his glory. They're rejecting everything. The tower was just an offshoot of this, because now, without this, we can be our own God. And God comes around and says, he's not going to break them, confound them, scatter them, and leave them. No, he said, because they all were made out of Adam. And I'm bringing them all back. But there has to be a process to get them all back. And in the process of getting them all back, he calls Abraham, a guy who's part of all the goyim, sanctifies him, sets him holy as an example that a nation can come out of him. Why? To show the other nations how to walk and how to live and how to eat and what is holy and what isn't holy. How to approach a holy God. How do you pray? You guys, the whole world has worship in them. They're all seeking some God. They're going to worship something, but God says, I'm going to show you me. So, if I was to take myself, not from the fall, but I want to go back to what God's original intent was. How Abel blessed God. How Adam, after the fall, was blessing God. If these things were in place before the fall, then the things that I try to honor that God calls his God, his ways, I want to align myself with his ways. I heard in that discussion when they asked Yeshua tempted him with a question. They tried to trap him in his words. They said, is it lawful to put away your wife, divorce your wife at any time? And Yeshua looked at him and says, haven't you read? The one who made them, that was not the beginning. He said, made them male and female. So it wasn't meant for a division. And they think like, okay, now we got you. How come Moshe, the one who brought down the Torah, Moshe, the one who set the tone for the law, Moshe, the one that we fall into all the Tanakh with, how come Moshe allowed it? Are you greater than Moshe? Now what do you got to say to that? And he said this, Moshe allowed that for you guys because your hearts were hardened. You're dealing in a broken world. You're cruel, you're unforgiving, you're unloving. There's a lot of sin in your life because you don't have God sitting on your throne. But because of the brokenness of the atmosphere and how cruel you can be, Moses showed mercy. He allowed for it. That's what he said. And in order to protect it, he defined a process to protect the woman and to protect them. Because you guys just throw them out there, you don't care. Because your passion, your heart going another way, you're going to do it this way. He said, but Moses allowed for it because of the hardness of your heart. Then he came right behind and says, but it was not so from the beginning. That was not God's original intent. That's not the best. That's not what God had planned. So the way Yeshua's telling them, all my questions and everything I'm telling you is based upon not a broken thought. I'm standing in God's way to do it according to how he's doing. I want to know God's original thought. I don't want to build my life off a broken society. No. I don't need someone to counsel me who needs to be counseled because they're doing the same thing. I don't need people to try to tell me how to fix me when they need to be fixed themselves. I need to go to the one who fixes everybody. I need to go to the one who's down inside, who knows my thoughts and understands what his original intent was for my life. To speak into my life and to guide me accordingly, because he knows me. I don't need hypocrisy. I need honesty. I need to go and be able to walk and eat and live like God originally designed for us to have dominion on earth. So, if I keep Shabbat, it's not a Jewish thing. It's a God thing. I'm operating before the fall. This is what God would define. If I keep his times, his times were in place before the fall, the creation of the world. I want to get back in sync with God's times. That's what Adam walked in. That's what Yeshua walked in. I want to walk accordingly. So if it means for me to be there for Pesach, be there for Shabbat, be there for unleavened bread, be there. These are things that were set in place, which God calls in the stars signs and for seasons. I want to be part of his original thought. I know for myself, I can't eat everything. Some of that stuff just gives me gas, My system wasn't made for that. I can eat, I love pork, I love this. God didn't say, you'll go to hell for this. But he's trying to say, I want you to live healthy. So if I keep dietary laws, it's because I want to eat what God has already put into place. It tells me that my body was designed to consume. I'm going to avoid all the hardened arteries and putting things there that wasn't supposed to be there. Avoid the dietary tracts because I'm eating stuff that I wasn't supposed to eat. God says that all things are lawful, but everything ain't profitable. Boy, I went to the fair and I had a great tenderloin. But boy, I paid for it later, It's not. So what Paul did is as he was talking to these God-fearers, he's taking them back to the beginning. He said, God had already planned. You guys are always part of the whole plan. Through Abraham, he was going to bless you. Abraham is going to be restored. You're part of the fall that transpired somewhere else. But that was the mystery. How was God going to get us all back? And God's plan to get them all back was through Abraham. He says, I will give him everything he needs. He will be the prototype. He will be the image where the blessings will come through him. The promise and the covenants, all through Abraham. So, as he told the Gentiles at the time, when they were struggling, should I be circumcised? Should I not be circumcised? Should I do this? Should I not do this? Should I do this? Paul said, God even defined to Abraham, I want you to have my scripture, to Abraham, why it was not necessary, even for the circumcision. He said, that was just an outward sign for you, for the world, so they can see that you're hearing my voice and my covenant alignment with you. Had nothing to do. I wasn't looking. I don't need that ring. Let me loosen the thing up. He said, I can take this ring and lose it, or it can be gone. He said, that doesn't make me any less married to Anita, with or without the ring. My covenant union is from the heart to hers. This is just an outward sign to the world to let you know that I'm taken. So the thing will say like this: should I get circumcised or should I not get circumcised? God will say that has nothing to do with anything. That's just an outward sign to the world. Your circumcision is of the heart. Your covenant agreement is of the heart. When you guys believed, that's what Paul said. He said, when you heard Yeshua, something quickened in your heart, and the power and zest in you changed. Now, why in the world do you think my marital relationship with Anita changes now because I put on the ring? Because I'm saying, she may say, well, I like silver, I like gold, I like bronze, I like this. Well, that has nothing to do with the covenant union we made. So Paul's telling those God-fearers, you can chase that and you can try to see if you can do something else, but what you did, you acted just like Abraham. When Abraham heard the voice of God, he said, he heard him and he believed. He received and he was obedient. You were doing the same thing, nothing more, nothing less. Abraham received him by faith and believed, and God calls righteousness. Nothing else added to it. So he said, get your feet back underneath you. Walk this life. Stay according to God's covenant grace. And be whole. Amen? Amen. Amen.